All right, welcome guys. So, we have from zero to Multi Sig. Everybody, again, introduce yourselves. I'm sure a lot of people know these are amazing people in the space, but let's go ahead and start off.
I'm BTC Sessions, Ben. I run a YouTube channel on how to learn how to do pretty much anything in Bitcoin.
That's all of them.
I'm Seth for Privacy, or Seth. I'm head of content for Foundation and a privacy educator in the space.
Mr. for Privacy.
My name is Trey Sellers. I'm a VP of Client Solutions at Unchained Capital. We help people hold their own keys to their Bitcoin in a way that has no counterparty risk to us or anybody else, and in a way that has no single points of failure, and we do that with Multi Sig.
As a customer, during these trying times with crypto casino collapses by the week, feels very, very good to be a Multi Sig customer
sleeping,
of your
sleeping
service.
well at night.
So speaking of, actually, this is a good way to start off. And I got this question from a couple of the people, actually, was just when and why do you use Multi Sig? Like, when is it beneficial? When is it a drawback? Like, what's the purpose? What's the major use from your perspective?
So I tend to look at things from evaluating risk and maybe allocating Bitcoin in different buckets depending on what the risk is. So, on one side of things, if you have a hardware wallet and you're holding your own keys, fantastic. You've already avoided the counterparty risk. However, you then have a single device and a single backup, which could be, $5 wrench attack, somebody kick in your door, get a hold of your coins. So when you go into something like a multi-sig, you're hedging against that risk. You're taking your coins, you're putting them into a vault that requires multiple keys to unlock, and then if you're thinking well about your multi-sig, it's geographically dispersed. So somebody kicks in your door, they have a key, well, they get nothing. And they may not even realize that that key is associated with the multi-sig because it's not inherent to the device. However, with multi-sig, you also have to think about, I'd say, two other buckets of risk. One is user error. So if you're doing your own multi-sig, then I'd say that would be in the bucket of something like state attack, right? Where if the government wants to ask providers, hey, does this person have multi-sig? And then they can, kick in your door, take your key, and then ask the provider to give up the other key. So in running your own multi-sig, you're hedging against that risk. In using a collaborative custody, like, Unchained, the risk bucket there is user error. If something happens to me and I've got my own multi-sig, well, I feel like even though I teach people for a living, my family might be fucked. So in this instance with the collaborative thing, my family maybe has two devices and a backup to each device. They can lose 75% of the stuff they're supposed to take care of. They can go to Unchained and say, we've got this one thing left. We were very irresponsible. And we have proof that we're next of kin. And you'll be okay. So you got to evaluate your risk and maybe allocate to buckets based on that.
Yeah, I think Ben hit the nail on the head. It's really all about threat model and what are you trying to protect against. And a threat model is really just where you look at what am I trying to protect, who am I trying to protect it from, and then what lengths am I willing to go to protect it. And I think for most people, honestly, multi-sig is adding in complexity and not really adding a lot of value. If you're just trying to do the multi-sig setup yourself, because it does introduce all that complexity and the extra risk of either user error or losing something, because you have to back up more than just seeds. There's a lot more involved. But it does provide a lot of, I think, use when you want to be able to share custody with someone you don't trust, or share custody with a company like Unchained, where you can do it in a way that doesn't give them the ability to spend funds, but they're able to help you with that setup process and help to ease things there.
Yeah, I think it's important to just, buttress the idea that Ben is talking about. Most people lose their Bitcoin through mistakes, right? They don't lose it because somebody kicks in their door and takes it.
You are the worst attack vector.
That's exactly right? People shoot themselves in the foot. And so, that collaborative custody model does solve that problem for a lot of people. because they're getting help, they're getting guidance throughout that setup process, they're getting guidance and support as they go forward and as their situation changes. And if something happens to one of those keys that they're controlling, because we are a partner in that custody model, we can step in and help them, right? And so, for the vast majority of people, if we're answering the question of why do you need multi-sig or who needs multi-sig, I think the answer is anybody who is securing a large amount or a material amount of Bitcoin that they want to hold on to for a very long time, and they want to make sure they don't have a single point of failure, multi-sig is a great solution for that. Certainly, if you're going to be walking around spending Bitcoin, you're probably going to want to use like a mobile wallet or something like that has different trade-offs. Your keys are hot, right? And there is a single point of failure there, but it's like cash that you would be keeping in your wallet that you'd be spending on coffee or whatever you're doing in the economy, right? Like that's where we're going. We're going to a circular economy, so there are different levels of risk that can be addressed with different solutions. Multi-sig is there for your multi-generational wealth that you need to pass on to your kids and to your grandkids.
There's an interesting, one of the things that fascinates me most about multi-sig, like I think it's hugely underappreciated, and it's one of those things too that, like as a tool in Bitcoin, like I still like, even with like Lightning and so much of what's going on in the space, is we're constantly still trying to chase like how do we add the next thing, where we've totally missed like truly expanding and taking advantage of the stuff that we already have. One of the things that interests me most, like from the context of Unchained being such a good example of it, is non-custodial financial services. Like something that's truly just infeasible, like it's axiomatically not possible in the fiat world, is that you could provide a financial service, you could create a collateralized relationship without ever actually giving your money to another person. And like that's a huge deal from like a service perspective and like a financial infrastructure perspective, in a world where the culture is so disgusting. And like crypto lately is such a great example of it, of seeing the fiat culture come into
Just lately,
come into the space and be like, oh, we're just going to rehypothecate and we're just going to fractional reserve and margin everything just like fiat, because it works great in fiat. Why would we have to change how we do or how we think about anything? And then it all blows up in everybody's face. And multi-sig is like Unchained. You guys don't have to have a proof of reserve scheme or like a third-party audit. Like you just hold one of the keys.
Unchained,
like,
right?
I
It's all
look at it
Unchained.
every day. It's crazy. And I just want to like get y'all's thoughts on like that idea of financial tools and infrastructure that are provided without actual custodianship.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't even realize how much multi-sig helps us to build out an actual like decentralized finance system within Bitcoin. I mean, if you've ever used BISC, you've used 2 of 2 multi-sig. If you've ever used Lightning and actually run your own node and use channels, you're using multi-sig. And that's really the foundation of many of these kind of peer-to-peer decentralized swap protocols. They leverage multi-sig so that you can not trust someone and yet be able to swap funds with them in a secure way. And I think a lot of the use cases for multi-sig are ones that people actually don't even realize they're using multi-sig in, because it enables these things that can be made seamless using really impressive user experience and UI, but actually use multi-sig under the hood, like you said, to actually just remove that custodial risk entirely, and help us to build out a better system that doesn't require KYC, that doesn't require trusting a custodian or trusting a third party.
I think you're seeing right now, again, in the context of everything that's happening the past few days here, as an example, you're seeing 2 worlds collide that are incompatible with each other. And you're seeing the results of the remnants of the fiat world trying to leverage this new kind of Bitcoin universe that is happening before our eyes. And they're trying to use the same tools that were used that would be fine in a situation where you can screw up so monumentally to the point where the money spigot will make you whole again, despite siphoning wealth out of the populace as a whole. That backstop was always still there.
Great way to cover that up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because people don't realize that the percentage of your purchasing power in an economy has just been cut by 40% in the past 2 years. I mean, most people in this room probably do recognize that, and that's why you're here and you're pissed about it. But there was that backstop, right? There was always that, oops, hit that button.
Let's just issue a whole bunch more finance and print some money, and we're good.
Yeah, but like the Bitcoin world is incompatible with that, because at the end of the day, you can't hit that button and print more Bitcoin. And even though you do have the backstop potentially, and I think this is an eventuality where we see banks trying to, again, we're regular banks that are now issuing Bitcoin custody services, and I think we're going to see FTX in those institutions eventually, because they're using the same mindset they've had for decades on a fiat standard, and it's not going to work. It's going to be, oh, well, now the banks are doing it, and they're the responsible ones. That's what people just said about SBF and FTX. He was the shining example of how the industry has matured, and now we're here, and now we've got better options, and everybody was patting him on the back. Well, guess fucking what? It's the same story at a bigger scale, and it's going to happen again. And so I think the people that are recognizing, hey, like, this is a different system, we need to think about it differently, and we need to build tools that are built in a way that doesn't have counterparty risk, I think that's amazing, and those are the people that will come out of this unscathed.
So I want to make one other tangential point, and just highlight the fact that multi-sig is actually novel. It's new. It's not something that we've ever had before, to be able to custody an asset that does not have a single point of failure while you're holding it, and importantly, you don't have to create a single point of failure when you need to move that asset, when you need to spend it. You can't do that with some of the old, like, you can see,
It's so crazy to think about. You can change the relationship without it still ever dropping back to like a singular control.
That's right.
Over.
That's right. Right.
God,
So like if you think about, you'll see pictures of these old, vaults, and they've got like some complicated contraptions and multiple keys, and people are holding them in different places, but those keys have to all come together to actually open that vault to get whatever gold or valuables are inside. With multi-sig, you don't have to do that, right? Because you can create a transaction, you can sign it in one location, and then you can leave that key in that location that you've got it secured, and you can go to your second location and sign that same transaction, and then broadcast it from there. And you never have to bring those keys together. That's completely novel, right? Our buddy, I think his name is Jimmy Zhang, the guy who got his 50,000 Bitcoin confiscated a little while ago. He created this complicated setup, and then neglected using multi-sig when he could have had those keys in
there was anybody
extra
who needed multi-sig.
Yeah. So like, why is this guy going to so much trouble concealing his tracks, but then not just taking the extra step of storing his Bitcoin in multi-sig and then having those keys in different jurisdictions so that there's no single point of failure while he's storing it, or if he needs to spend the Bitcoin, he can just go to those different locations.
I will just touch on quickly, that is one of the threats that you actually can't prevent with multi-sig, is that if your government puts you in jail and asks you to provide the Bitcoin, like, most people are going to give in and provide that Bitcoin even if it is a multi-sig. I mean, there's cases of old, like, there's a centralized mixer, and he did have multi-sig spread across multiple geographic locations, but they just threw him in jail and said, until you give us this, you're in contempt of court, and eventually just turned it over.
That's
so
a good
that is
point,
one of the
actually,
few that you
yeah.
can't fix, because ultimately
The
you can be
$5 wrench.
pressured into doing things, and that can be the government or a $5 wrench.
Yeah,
but
but
$5 wrench is a lot harder, and multi-sig does help against that, of just a random attacker, but a government throwing you in jail is a little bit more consequential.
Well, just the $5 wrench, I just think of it as like they're just going to attack me. So
Yeah.
like being put in jail is, in my opinion, the $5 wrench attack. I think of it like that.
It could help if, like, you were part of a company who were in multiple jurisdictions and the government put one person in jail and they didn't have the possibility to turn it over. There are still advantages, but there's some threats where you may just want to turn over your Bitcoin and be forced to do so.
Yeah. We shouldn't make it easy for them, though.
Absolutely,
Right? We
absolutely.
should make it as hard as possible.
Make it
They
For
shouldn't find it
typical,
in a popcorn tin under some blankets.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so actually on that, like, in taking advantage of multi-sig, one of the things that is, and I know this is like a big thing for you just because like we've used like Nunchuck and like some of these things, but just how far in like the last year and a half, really, the user experience of multi-sig has come. Like, it used to be a pain. and man, it's changed drastically.
Compatibility was my number one concern out the gate, because you'd set up a multi-sig and you would think, okay, but what if this wallet breaks, like this interface that I'm using breaks and I need to use it with something else? And the answer initially was, you're fucked. I mean, not entirely. Like you had, but it was very technical to try and figure it out.
It's not gonna be fun.
Yeah, and then you know, maybe you had a multi-sig using a certain interface and you were using certain devices, and then you want to move over to a different one and you realize, oh, this device isn't supported, this one isn't supported, or I can't like port my wallet over and even see the balance. Like it's a complicated process to do so. Now we're seeing, what I've personally seen is this proliferation of all these interfaces saying, we're going to work as hard as we can, and actually, you know, at the actual devices themselves, they're working together to say, we want to have as much support as possible for as many options as possible, and the ability to port that setup over to any other interface that you choose to use. So, you know, for example, like again, Unchained, you can take out your wallet file and you can use it with Caravan, but you can also use it with tons of other Spectre, Sparrow, like all, you can do what you want with it and use it how you want, right? So, yeah, just the compatibility of it all, and also the sleekness of the user interface has improved a lot. Like you're getting these nice setups where you see, you know, like a little image of the device that you're using, and you can, oh, I want to create a new multi-sig wallet. Great, what devices would you like to use? And you check them off, and then you hit create, and it's just there. So it's becoming much simpler, much easier. There's plenty of work to do. Again, it's still going to be complicated for the average person doing their own multi-sig if they choose to do so, but it's getting much, much better, and it's happening quickly, and I'm happy for that.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, do y'all have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I started using multi-sig with Spectre desktop.
Okay, yeah.
And yeah, it made it easy, right? It was like I had never considered it before that tool was available to me. I got that all set up, feeling really good about things, got some sats in there. I realized my wife would have zero idea how to figure that out, right? And the collaborative custody model that Unchained does, like that becomes immediately impaired when you start thinking about that inheritance planning scenario, right? But the fact that multi-sig is easy and is available, it allows Bitcoin to scale as a store of value for, you know, for the long term and for a massive amount of capital to be able to come in there without people feeling like they've got their entire life savings on a thumb drive that they could just lose, right?
And to your point too, and what Seth was saying earlier, you mentioned companies, like, oh, this might be useful for companies. Absolutely, this should be the default for companies, right? Like, and countries now, we have examples of countries that are holding Bitcoin, and that should be how it's done, but
we don't know.
Is it?
We don't
That's the
know.
question.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the question.
So
Are they just gonna take the short route and hold it on Coinbase?
I hope it wasn't on FTX.
Good God. So there's actually something interesting there when you bring that up, is jurisdictional arbitrage. So the trucker convoy and the donations that were sent to them were such a great example. And I just expand on that. Like, what's the value and use of multi-sig in that sort of a situation?
So I'm going to caveat this by saying, out the gate, the initial expectation was, oh, this will continue to be legal, and this will be maybe a small amount of donations, a few $1,000s. And so because of that, I take full responsibility. I made just terrible assumptions and terrible best practices out the gate in creating that initial page to accept donations. And unfortunately, that's just, hindsight is 20/20. So I learned a lot in that moment. That said, out of all of that, you know, 70% of the funds were handed directly to people. Unfortunately, there was a bug at the time, there was a bug in Nunchuck And so 30% of the funds prior to being able to be moved out were basically frozen. And so that resulted in an instance where multiple keys were in a single place at one time, as that bug is trying to be worked out, and kick in the door, and that was easy apparently. So those are now sitting in a legal escrow, awaiting the result of a lawsuit. That said, on the multi-sig front, so again, with the initial thoughts of, hey, this will continue to be legal, the thought was, we just don't want the keys in a single place. But the assumption was, okay, well, let's get Canadian Bitcoiners to be key holders, and we'll just have them dispersed, so that there's just not a single point of failure. The state attack vector was not thought of. And so all of a sudden, having publicly identifiable Canadian Bitcoiners as key holders in a multi-sig quorum became a problem. Because then it's, oh, we know who these people are. We could just go to them. And so then it was a race against time to rearrange the quorum. Also, it was a 3 of 5 multi-sig quorum, which, if you've ever tried to wrangle Bitcoiners into getting shit done, it's very difficult. And so I would say also the fact that the quorum was larger instead of just a 2 of 3 was actually a detriment, and it cost us time. And in the end, that wasn't a great thing. So had I looked at this differently, like looking at it now, I would say perhaps a good way of looking at it is having identifiable trust, because there's the don't trust, verify, right? People wanted to donate, but who the hell are you? And so having public faces resulted in more donations, which is good, but it also was an attack vector. So perhaps having publicly identifiable Bitcoiners know the key holders and say, I vet this key holder, but I'm not a single point of failure. They can kick in my door and say, give us the keys. Well, I know the key holder. He's not in Canada. So you could have a model like that. You'd have to flesh it out more, but that's my initial thought. Maybe a smaller quorum, and you got to take into account the different attack vectors.
I think there's a reason that SBF is in the Bahamas, right? Or where's he at? And that's because extradition is a little harder there, right? And so if you are able to distribute those keys in multiple jurisdictions, you can prevent, at least to some degree, some of that state attack. Now, for the vast majority of everybody here, that's not necessarily your threat model. For the Canadian trucker thing, it's a different game theory that's playing out in that scenario.
Yeah.
But for the majority of us, right, we just need to make sure that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot and not losing the Bitcoin that we need to be passing down to future generations.
Yeah, inheritance. That one of the things about multi-sig, this is actually something that there's a feature or a build out of multi-sig that I'm still waiting for. Like, I've been thinking about it since like 2013 and 2014 when there was a Vault wallet. I can't remember what the hell it was, but started to talk about it, and it was like the first multi-sig thing that I'd ever used.
Copay.
No, not Copay.
No.
I did use Copay.
Okay.
It was after Copay though, or excuse me, before Copay. Is the idea of cascading wallet access, of essentially taking advantage of time lock, of relative and then absolute time lock, and having it so that right now it's a 5 of 7, but if let's say 3 or 4 of those keys are lost, well, after after some subset of like a first publishing, you get 6 months later, it's now a 2 of 3, and if there's a key lost there, it's now another year later, it's a 1 key or a 2 of 2 or a 1 of 2 or something like that, and it essentially allows a service provider to be a fallback. You can have like a lawyer in a situation that's not. You can have so many different levels of exposure and give essentially the time to claim your valid ownership of it, but never actually lose it in the case of fallen apart keys or people who have no idea what the hell is going on and all that sort of stuff.
So this was actually the default and continues to be an option with Blockstream Green. So it's actually a 2 of 2 multi-sig as a regular phone wallet. The way that it works is Blockstream Green holds a key themselves, and you have a key, and the key that they hold is on their server. And when you do a transaction, you sign with your key. Then Blockstream sends you a code. Either you have it through like a Google Authenticator or like a 2FA type thing, or an SMS or an email, however you want to set it up, and then that is the second sign. But after a year, so if Blockstream went tits up and they couldn't sign for you, well, after a year, it reverts to one of one, and that only applies to the key that you have on your phone. So, it happens from the point of the last transaction that you did. Okay, so it
just refreshes at every transaction.
Yeah, exactly. But it's 2 of 2 multi-sig, and then it becomes 1 of 1 with only your key.
I don't think I even knew that there was a timeline.
I didn't know that either. I knew it was 2 of 2, but yeah.
I've been using green for so long.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really interesting use case for multi-sig, and it's actually also specifically enabled by Taproot. It's one of the things that we actually can do with Taproot. And somebody presented at HCPP in Prague, one of the devs behind BDK, was talking about how you could use Taproot to create that kind of a decaying multi-sig where, let's say you don't trust your family members to be able to spend your funds right now, and you don't want to give them access to your Bitcoin. But like you said, if you die, you don't want your Bitcoin to just disappear into the ether. It's a way that you can set up this multi-sig so you can give all of these family members, maybe 7 different family members, a key. None of them can spend funds. You could even do it in a way that's privacy preserving, though that's more advanced. But like you said, after time passes, you can have it decay so that it's easier and easier to recover. Because many people lose things, like we talked about. That's the biggest risk, is you losing your own Bitcoin. So if multiple family members lose it, you can have it decay after that 1,000 blocks or 10,000 blocks or whatever, and you refresh that with every transaction. So it's a kind of a combination of the green model with some fancy scripting you can do with Taproot that enables that as a way to pass down inheritance when you don't trust every person involved and you don't want to give them just the ability to spend funds freely, which I think is an important one. I think thinking more deeply about how we can enable inheritance with Bitcoin in a way that's detached from the legal system is really important, because I don't think we want to be bound by lawyers and by kind of the fiat system when we're trying to do inheritance. So coming up with ways that we can do that in a programmatic way that's Bitcoin only and that lets us do it without the involvement of lawyers or third parties is really important.
I was just going to make one quick comment on the time lock thing, which is that you got to be really careful that you haven't added like an extra 0 or something at the end of that.
There have been coins lost.
Yes. You might be waiting a long time for that Bitcoin if you fuck that up.
It's like, no, it's 10 years. No, dude, that's 1,000. You did 1,000 years.
My
Hodl, bitch.
My children's children are going to be so rich.
There's something interesting too, like that you talk about, of like not having financial third parties and not having lawyers and stuff involved, is that this brings, and this is something that I've thought for like a long time with what Bitcoin is actually going to bring, and I see this a lot in like my personal life, is the decentralization of the ability to provide services and provide assistance. Like I feel like we're in this interesting place where essentially your tech friend, like, every family group has like the tech guy, and they're always fixing everybody's computer and router and like all their problems. Well, now they can essentially be a beneficial trust model. Like, we can actually go back to one of the dominant models in like the late 1800s was more of a kind of family trust, like fraternity sort of relationship, where money wasn't built on these giant centralized distant institutions. It was built on your community and the people around you. And we can kind of bring it back to that, this Uncle Jim model of I know a lot of people will actually keep backups of families' keys and grandparents and brothers and sisters and stuff. But how much better would it be if it was actually just a key that's not even active for 6 months, only if something went wrong, rather than a second point of failure for somebody kicking in the door and finding keys or whatever it is. What's kind of your perspective on maybe the best secondary use case in that regard? Like what do you see as like kind of the Uncle Jim model being relevant to the multi-sig setup, and how could it be best applied?
I think it's tricky with the Uncle Jim model. Like, there's so many things that is brilliant and applicable and really important for us with. It's tricky with something like multi-sig because in that Uncle Jim model, normally you're giving up custody to that person. Even if you're doing like a multi-sig Uncle Jim where it's these people in the community that you theoretically trust, you're still giving up custody. So there's always going to be a trade-off there. And I mean, that's one of the things with something like Fediment. Like, you give over custody and you do gain these advantages, but you have to understand that then there is counterparty risk. So like the Uncle Jim model gets tricky there. I think that's where like the Unchained approach, where you're trusting Unchained as the Uncle Jim, which I don't know if that term applies.
Let us be your Uncle Jim.
Yeah, the new tagline. I think that's the more applicable one when you have multi-sig, because they are at least a reputable company and there's some more reasons to trust them, but also in that scenario, they don't have access to your funds and they can't spend them.
Well, and as an institution or as a company, we have a longer lineage, or we can be around for longer than your real Uncle Jim might be, right? Like, if he gets hit by a bus and there's nobody else that can fill that gap of knowledge and understand how to recover from that scenario, you might be in trouble, right? So, the fact that in this collaborative custody model, we're there as experts helping guide you along the way, and there are multiple of us, and you can get in touch with us at any time, and we're going to help you, not only recover from mistakes, but also help you manage UTXOs and all the other like maintenance aspects of it. That's really important and really beneficial. And so having us be your Uncle Jim solves for that problem.
One quick note to add on that is just that there are interesting ways where you can do not multi-sig, but actually share your seed phrase. It's called Shamir secret sharing. It's very advanced. It's not something that's common now, but I think that's something that I would love to see more organizations and projects look into, because it's a way where you could essentially offload storage of your seed to maybe 20 friends and family that you don't want to have your seed phrase, you don't want to have funds, but they can help in the recovery process. And if you have some lower threshold of them that are around, they can text you that key secret that you give them, or if there's some other way to hand that off. That's an interesting way where you can not give over custody to any one of them unless they all collaborate, but you can still do some sort of like a social recovery, which I think is something that has been underexplored in the Bitcoin space.
Yeah, Shamir's secret sharing is something that I've always been interested in, but I found like HexaWallet did that for a while before they switched over to, I think they're now in like a multi-sig setup, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember exactly the design.
It also doesn't have the advantage of being able to keep the keys separated for signing transactions and moving the Bitcoin, right? You do have to bring that together.
Different threat model, for sure.
Yeah.
And one of the big issues, too, is the out-of-band communication that you have to have with secret sharing, whereas with multi-sig, they just have their key. You don't have to communicate each other's keys to each other. Everybody just needs a joint place to sign, like Nunchuck or Spectre or something.
I would suggest that if you need to eliminate single points of failure, just use multi-sig. Yeah. I don't see the reason to use Shamir's, or another thing people bring up to us a lot is a passphrase, right? If you're using a passphrase, you're essentially using like a 2 of 2 multi-sig. You've got 2 single points of failure there. If you lose your seed phrase, your funds are gone. If you lose your passphrase, your funds are gone, right? And you're adding complexity. You're not necessarily adding security there. If you're using 2 of 3 multi-sig, you don't have that single point of failure. You're eliminating that. And it's a similar level of complexity.
A PSA to anybody who uses a passphrase wallet: use something that you can remember. There is no reason to do a 13-character random generated password, and the difference between a 10-character and a 13-character is like 20,000 years. So if you're trying to get back into it, just use. You're already got an incredible level of security, and you've got an extra thing. As someone who has lost money this way, please just make it so it's easy to remember.
But Guy, you may be able to remember it today and tomorrow, but
True.
Next week you might fall off your bike and hit your head, and the Bitcoin's gone, right? Because you can't remember it anymore.
Sure, it's not the best mechanism in the world, but simple is better because it's extra security for just the sake of it.
If you're going to degrade your security level by using a passphrase, make it a simple passphrase.
I don't know if we have time. I wanted to hit a little bit on privacy and like the idea of first Taproot, and then also like blinded XPubs, like the ability to sign and just kind of have some degree of privacy from even the members you are with, you know? So maybe quick thoughts on that before we close this out.
Yeah, I mean, just the quick call out is that when you do any sort of multi-sig, every other participant has visibility into every transaction that happens. I mean, that's true of Unchained, that's true of a multi-sig you do with yourself, obviously, what you do with friends, do with family. So that is the big privacy concern with that, is they know how much money you have, when you spend it, when you receive funds, etc. So there are some interesting ways that you mentioned blinded eggs pubs, which introduces more complexity, but it's a way that you can do custodial or custodianship through multi-sig without actually revealing any of the addresses that you've received funds to, without revealing how much you own, or without revealing when you spend. So I would love to see, like, Unchained and other companies like that explore how you could integrate blinded eggs pubs, maybe as a separate service. But I think that's a very important one, because that's one of the big downfalls with doing some sort of collaborative multi-sig, is you do give over all of your on-chain privacy when you do that. And that's just kind of how multi-sig works, but it's an important caveat for people to be aware of.
Yeah, I'll just say that there is a privacy trade-off there. The benefit that you're getting is what we've already talked about, right? Which is that we're there to help make sure that you can actually access your Bitcoin if something happens to one of the keys that you're controlling, right? And so there is that determination of, okay, what are the trade-offs? What do I value more for this Bitcoin that I'm planning on passing down to my kids? I think a lot of people will opt for, hey, I'd much rather have this service provider here, this partner in custody, to be able to make sure that I actually can hold on to my Bitcoin for the long term, and I'm willing to give up a little bit of that privacy, in that scenario.
I'm just gonna. I know we're pretty much out of time here, but I just want to finish by saying, if you haven't tried multi-sig, I think it's, even if you're not going to use it, it's worth learning a little bit. I think it's always worth learning about what your options are. And so, I mean, there's plenty of easy options out there where you can just start playing.
On
again,
testnet, not mainnet, but
Yeah.
do testnet.
yeah, sure. Or like very small amounts if you're unsure. But like again, like Sparrow, Spectre. Even
What's your favorite tool right now?
I always use Sparrow for
Sparrow?
everything. It's
Yeah.
my kind of
100%
my default.
Sparrow.
Sparrow?
Yeah.
I use Sparrow as well.
Yeah.
Shit, never mind.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
I use Unchained, but we're able to, build our vaults in something like Sparrow, connect it to my own node, and I can manage it from there and not have to trust Unchained's node, right? So everything that we do is in a Bitcoin native way, and true to those principles of being fully self-sovereign.
Yeah, and even if you're just here and you're playing with somebody and you're just curious about multi-sig, you can literally in the parking lot right now, just as a test, download Blue Wallet and create a vault together in like 2 minutes between like 3 different phones. It's kind of cool. So if you're playing around later, try that.
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. We should do that with somebody. Anyway, I just want to say thank you guys so much, very much for joining me. I think multi-sig is one of those things that, just one of the things that you talked about is just that Lightning is multi-sig, and a lot of people kind of forget how powerful of a tool this thing is, and it's exciting to see a lot of it get much more user-friendly and see some of the things that we get to build with this. And so, it's awesome. Thank you guys for joining me. And
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.